All right, welcome back to Mr. PL's with Precal. This is Unit 3, Topic 2, Lesson number 2. So we are now graphing trig functions with phase shifts. Starting off with a quick review of what we did in the last video for this warm-up. So this is what's called the midline. So we know the midline is 2. We know the amplitude is 1, 2, 3. We know the period in this case, the time it takes in order to complete one full cycle, which would be 5 key points, is 4 pi. All right, so now 2 pi divided by 4 pi gives us b. So the pi's cancel out, and 2/4 is 1/2. So I can write the equation using 1/2 as b. So the equation is going to be amplitude times sine of 1/2 x plus the midpoint, which is at 2. So there's your equation right there. All right, so getting right into it. So now we've only done map. Now we're going to talk about the S, which is the phase shift. That's the C term. So the A is the amplitude. That's what makes it how tall it is. That's the vertical stretch. D is the vertical shift. That's how it moves the function, the middle of the function. The B determines how many times it does a wave in 2 pi amount of time. So in this case, it's from here to here is just a half a wave. So that should only be 1/2 because it only does half of a cycle in that amount of time. That's half of a sine cycle. You would have to have the other half of a sine cycle to be one complete cycle per 2 pi. So that's what would make B 1/2 in this case. A is, okay, so I might as well just do this. So the midline happens to be at 2. So that is your D, and the amplitude is 1, 2, 3, and your C term, well, this one does not have a shift in this equation because it actually is a sine function, and it actually starts right at the midpoint. So there is no phase shift in this question. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's right in the middle. Okay, so there is other ways of writing this equation. So this equation would end up being 3 times sine of, as I mentioned, so the period in this case, it takes 4 pi amount of time in order to complete one cycle. To divide that by 2, you get 1/2, so it's 1/2 x, and then plus the midline, which is 2. So now that's the equation that you have right here graphed, but also we could also write this equation with a shift. So if I use this as the vertical asymptote, which means I've moved everything to the right pi amount of time, basically. So now it will become a cosine function because now it's starting at the highest point. So therefore, the amplitude is still 3. It's multiplied by cosine of, and the b is still 1/2 of x minus pi because it moved to the right pi amount of time. And remember, anything that's on the inside of something is always going to be the opposite of what you would normally think. So moving to the right is actually going to be minus, and moving it to the left would actually be plus. And then the plus 2 for the midline. Now, I don't usually always put these parentheses on the outside. Not always needed, but I did in this case. All right, so maps in this case. So highest point is 5, lowest point is -3. Add those two together, you get 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I now know that 1 is in between 5 and -3. So that's the midline. The amplitude 1, 2, 3, 4. The period, how long it takes to complete one full cycle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like it takes 2. And the phase shift, well, there isn't one in this case. Because like I said before, so this is starting at the minimum, which means it's cosine function. If it didn't start at the minimum or the maximum or the midline, then you definitely have a phase shift involved. You can always shift any function. In fact, there's an infinite amount of ways to write an equation for any of these trig graphs because you can move it any amount you want left or right because the domain is all real numbers. So the way this sits, this would be -4 because it starts at the minimum times cosine of 2 pi over 2 is pi, so that would be pi times x plus the midline of 1. Now, what if I move it? What if I move it to here? So that's going to make this a sine function. So that's moving it to the right 1/2. So that's going to be +4 now because it's a sine function going up initially of 1/2. No, this was pi, sorry. Pi times x minus 1/2 and then plus the 1 at the end. All right, so there's two ways to write the exact same equation. If you put them both in the graphing calculator, they should be the exact same thing. All right, so this one, the midpoint is at -1. The amplitude is 1. The period, it takes to complete one cycle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like it takes pi amount of time. And then the phase shift, there isn't one in this case. So we can do that as 1 times sine, -1, sorry, -1 because it goes down first, times sine of 2 pi divided by 2 is 1. 2 pi divided by pi, why did I just do that? Is 2. So this is sine of 2x plus the midpoint, which is -1. Okay, so what if I want to shift that to here and make it a cosine function? So that would be, it starts at the -1 again. So -1 times cosine of 2x. That happens to be, okay, whoops, I put my parentheses in the wrong place, minus pi over 4. And then -1. Okay, so that's 2 parentheses x minus pi over 4, end parenthesis, -1. All right, more. Very much the same as what I just did. So this is 70, this is 30. Add them together, you get 100. 100 divided by 2 is 50. So 50 we know is the midline. The amplitude then would be 20 because that's the distance from here to here or here to here. Those are both 20. The period, the amount of time it takes to complete one shift. Okay, now this one has a phase shift. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 means it went from 4 to 44. That's a period of 40. This one did not start at the maximum, did not start at the minimum, nor did it start at the midline. It actually started somewhere in between. So this one's definitely got a phase shift that's moving to the right 4. All right, so its equation in this case, so we have to do this with the phase shift, so that would be 20 times cosine, because it starts at the maximum. Keep in mind that we're using this as the vertical axis now. We need to do 2 pi divided by 40. So 2 and 40 can be simplified to 1 and 20, so that's pi over 20. Multiplied by x minus 4. And then outside the parentheses is going to be plus 50 for the midline. Okay, so now what if I don't want to use this cosine point? What if I want to use this sine point? So it looks like it's right in the middle. So 4, 8, 12, 16. It looks like that's 16 right there. So I'm going to use that to, so it's 20 times, -20, sorry, times sine. I know it's negative because it's going down first now if you use a sine function. If you moved it all the way over to here, then it would be positive amplitude, positive 20 times. Sine of pi over 20, x minus 16 plus the 50. Same exact equation. All right, so this one, okay, well, first of all, 14 plus 2 is 16, divided by 2 is 8. Okay, so no phase shift on this one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I know the period is 5. The 8 is the midline, and the amplitude is 6. Okay, so now we're ready. So 2 pi divided by the period ends up being, that's 1/2. So 1/2 pi, or just pi over 2. All right, so now it's sine, positive amplitude. So 6 times sine of pi over 2, and then plus 8. All right, so what if I want to phase shift and move it to here? So that's moving it to the right. I believe that's 1. It's kind of hard to tell. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, because each one is an equal part. So we know it's moving right 1 now. So that would be cosine. So 6 times cosine of pi over 2 times x minus 1 plus 8. That would be the exact same equation. Now, the other skill that you need to be able to do, oh, you know what? Graphing these. I got time to do it. I'll do one of these. So first thing I need to do is add 3 to both sides. So you know that that's now the midline. The amplitude is 2. The period, 2 pi over 2. So leave, change. The pi's cancel out. 2 times 2 is 4. So the period is 4, and the shift is 1. So that's right 1. All right, so first the shift. That's right 1. The period is 4, so I need to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is 5. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And now we can graph it. So it's cosine, so we need to start at the maximum or minimum. Okay, I need my increments going up and down. So the midline is at 3, 1, 2, 3. And the amplitude was 2, so I need to go 2 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. So I got my 3 heights now at 5, 3, and 1. Okay, so now I'm ready to graph. So cosine means starts at the positive 2, so down here, then here. I'm not doing that correctly. So remember, the vertical axis got shifted, so it should be here and here and here and here and here. All right, so these are, forget about those other points. It's not letting me delete them. Those are the real ones because I messed up there. I started here, but remember, we moved the vertical axes. We shifted everything 1 to the right, so I had to start at the new vertical axis. All right, so these questions are very much the same as what we had just done. I do want to practice these questions because now we're taking the graphs and turning them into equations, and I don't want to run out of time. So our lowest point is -1. Our highest point is 4. Add those two together, you get 3. Half of that will be 1.5. So it looks like every 1 is a half. So 1.5 will be right there. 1.5 to 4, so the midline is 1.5. The amplitude, 1.5 to 4 would be 2.5. The period, time it takes to complete 1 full cycle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pi amount of time. And the shift, there isn't one. Okay, so now we're ready to write the equation. That would be 2.5, -2.5 times cosine of 2 pi over pi makes 2, so of 2x plus the midline of 1.5. All right, pretty basic because there's no phase shift in that question. And then 4 does have a phase shift. All right, so midline, highest point looks to be 2. Lowest point also looks to be -2, so in between would be 0. Amplitude would be 2. Phase shift, okay. So, well, if I want to make this a sine function right here, so I'm going to shift it pi over 4 to the right, so that's to the right. And the period, the amount of time it takes to complete 1 cycle, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I need 1 more point. Okay, so from here to here. So it goes from negative. So this is 1/4 pi, then 2/4 pi, 3/4 pi, 4/4 pi, 5/4 pi? No, that's not right. Let me count this again. So from here, so that would be -1/4. That's 2/4. And then, okay, it doesn't seem like these increments are right. If this was a 1/4, then this should have been a 1/2. This is wrong. And then this should have been pi right here. And then this should have been 5/4 pi right here. If I'm not mistaken. Because if this was... Oh, no. Sorry. Nah, that's not right. All right, so it actually is the way it is. Because what I was thinking that this 1 point was from here to the vertical axis was 1 point, but it's not. So it's actually going half of pi. So 1/2 of pi, 2 halves of pi, 3 halves of pi, 4 halves of pi. 4 halves of pi is 2 pi. Okay, so sorry about that. 2 pi is the phase shift, so 2 pi over 2 pi is obviously 1. So now we're ready to build the equation. So this happens to be, so if I start it here, it's going to be -2 times sine of x, or just 1x. Oops, no. Let me start that over because there's the phase shift. Sine of 1x, so it's sine of x minus pi over 4 plus the midline, which was 0. Okay, so there's the equation right there. If I was going to do that with another equation, I could use this point right here at cosine. So that would be -2 also. Cosine of x minus... in between a 1/2 and pi would be 3/4 pi, so 3 pi over 4. So that's x minus 3 pi over 4 plus, well, there is no midline change. So that would be the equations. There's 2 equations of the exact same graph. All right, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Thanks again for watching, and have a wonderful day.